Welcome back. Communication is very important, but listening is probably just as important than hearing people speak. Sometimes the listener adds their own perceptions to what's being said. Ethan Kutlu from the University of Iowa will talk about how visual cues and the diversity of a listener's social network can impact their ability to understand the spoken word. Thank you, Ethan.
Hello, everyone. My talk is titled Perception in Context, How Racialized Identities Impact Speech Perception. So in everyday conversations, listeners gather a lot of information from speakers. One such information is the speaker's accent. And we start developing this ability at a very young age. In fact, infants start doing this as early as during the first year of life. So let's take this infant as an example. And I'm going to call this infant as Baby Z. Baby Z is going to hear a bunch of different adults talking to themselves, which will be an overheard speech for Baby Z. But these adults will also be directly talking to Baby Z, which will, again, impact the linguistic representations of their language development. As a result, Baby Z will create their own unique accent. In fact, this is the process that we all went through when we were acquiring our first language or languages. But we don't only use individual variability. We also use the context-dependent information to form our accents. So for instance, if Baby Z grow up in a place like Gainesville, Florida, they will learn what it means to be a speaker in that particular context. And in comparison to that, if Baby Z grows up in a place like Montreal, Canada, they will also learn the contextual information from that context. And when Baby Z grows up to be an adult, they will learn implicitly and explicitly to use different language ideologies to inform their judgments during a conversation. So in this study, what we did was we asked to what extent does context contribute to speech perception? So what it means to grow up in a place like Gainesville, Florida in comparison to Montreal, Canada. And of course, we picked these two locations for a very particular reason. While Gainesville, Florida in the United States has a lot of bilingual individuals, there's not much of bilingual commitment happening in the United States due to monolingual ideologies. Whereas in Montreal, Canada, bilingualism is promoted and it's more appreciated. So what we did here, we presented participants, our listeners, different faces, either a white face or a South Asian face on a computer screen. And then we played sentences that would have either American English, British English, or Indian English accents. And we picked these accents also for a particular reason, because we know from previous literature that British English is still perceived as stereotypically the most prestigious variety, and Indian English is still perceived as stereotypically the least prestige variety. And American English here serves as the control group. So we asked participants to look at the computer screen and type down what they heard, and we also asked them to judge whether the speaker had an accent in comparison to their own perceived accent or not. Here on this graph, I'm showing you the results of our study. While in Gainesville, every time we changed faces from a white face to South Asian face, the transcription accuracy went down. In Montreal, this was not the case. So in Gainesville, people used the faces that they saw on computer screen to inform their commitment to that perceiving that speech, whereas in Montreal, people didn't have any issues seeing different faces or different accents. And if you look at here, the accentless judgments, in Gainesville, while American English was judged as least accented compared to British and Indian English, there was a huge face effect, such that whenever we switch faces from a white face to South Asian face, people's perception of those individuals' accentedness ratings went up. So an individual who speaks the exact same American English was judged more accented if he presented the stimuli with a South Asian face compared to a white face. And in Montreal, people did not use faces as cues. You can see on the graph on the right here, they map British English and Indian English on top of each other, suggesting that for them, while American English was closer to their accent, both British English and Indian English were equally accented. Now, what does this mean for our everyday interactions? I'm showing you some tweets on the screen now that were taken in 2015, some customers criticizing big companies using Indian English speakers in call centers. The same things are happening in year 2021, and these linguistic stigmatizations are still very permanent in online spaces. And the issue is that when we look at accents, while we all have our unique accents, the problem starts with putting different accents in positions where they will receive more stigma and hate. And call centers is one of the examples of such process. Because if you're like me, the last time you called a call center was probably when you were in urgent need of help and not to have a chat with somebody on the other side of the phone. And using people in those places to get accustomed to different accents may not be the best way to tackle with the diversity issue that we observe in languages. Thank you so much for your attention, and I'm happy to take any questions now.
Thank you, Ethan.
Yep.
A couple of questions that I have. Do you feel like the racial diversity of a city has a direct impact on how the voices are perceived?
Yes, exactly. So I did not present that here during my presentation, but we did measure the diversity in Gainesville, Florida, and diversity in Montreal, Canada, and statistically those places differ in terms of both linguistic and racial diversity. And on top of that, we also measure the social networks of individuals in Gainesville versus in Montreal, and while in Gainesville people do have bilingual individuals in their network, they are not very integrated with their own personal networks. Whereas in Montreal, they're all integrated with bilingualism and hearing different diverse linguistic input. Yeah.
Question from the floor?
Yeah, so in your study, did you ask the participants if they themselves were bilingual?
Yes, so this entire experiment only included bilingual participants, so they were all bilingual individuals. Yeah.
Gotcha.
Can I ask what their whole other question from yours? So first, what were they bilingual in anything, or was it like Hindi, Urdu, Punjabi, Malayalam, like
yes,
all those plus
uh-huh.
English and like French plus English? Did you limit it to?
Yeah,
Hindi?
so
Okay.
with the so for both sites, both Gainesville and Montreal, we only included Spanish English bilinguals in Gainesville and French English bilinguals in Montreal.
Okay.
And if they were accustomed to other languages, or particularly languages like Hindu and Tamil and Telugu, we particularly excluded those individuals because of their familiarity with Indian English and
Okay.
British English. Yeah.
And then my original question, more of a personal one, is the individuals that you were testing, were they in same race relationships? Do you have information? Because like my husband has an Indian accent, and I would like to think that I would not create a stigma of somebody with an Indian accent, since that is a very common thing for me.
Yeah.
So I wondered if there's demographic data of like your amount of exposure to one of the accents versus the other, if it didn't, the face thing was different.
Yeah, so for Gainesville population, we had a very limited diversity in terms of racial and ethnic backgrounds. It was mostly white, Hispanic, or Latinx individuals, and in Montreal, we had a much larger diverse group. But in that group, we also just wanted to statistically control for 2 locations. We did not have any individuals who self-identify South Asian, but we did have a sociolinguistic survey, and we found that familiarity with the accent is definitely one of the factors that impact how people perceive and pay attention to different accents. Yeah.
Very cool.
Thank you.
Yeah, and one more. Do you have plans to extend these studies further?
Yes, so I will be actually expanding this study to an EEG study where we look at brain waves and how, not doing the task itself, but by just looking at people's brain responses and how they underlyingly process different accents and what that means when we show them different faces or not. So that will be the upcoming part. Yeah.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
I had one more question. And correct me if I'm wrong, but your study showed that intelligibility decreased for those who saw the South Asian faces.
Yes, correct.
Was there much, I think your graphic showed, but why was there such disparity between Gainesville and Montreal in that particular instance?
Yes, so we previously normed all these sentences to have at least 85% intelligibility. So we shouldn't be seeing anything below 85, but in Gainesville we are seeing below 85. And the reason behind it is when we looked at participants' responses, people actually stopped typing in the middle of a sentence. So it was not that they were not fully understanding, that when they were seeing a picture, they will just stop typing down the sentences. And that shows something about the ability to pay attention when you see a face that is already racialized and stigmatized, and the accent that's associated with that, and how it affects people's behavior. And in Montreal, we did not see that. Again, it could be a result of, in Montreal, hearing different accents, different dialects is more common compared to Gainesville, Florida.
That's really interesting. All right.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ethan.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
We have one more presenter to go, so don't go anywhere.